Oh man, come on, church. Who is grateful to be in church today? I love being here. So grateful. I know you're grateful as well to be in the presence of not only an amazing Savior, but also in the presence of some amazing Christ followers here at Rock City Church. I'd like to welcome all our campuses. Short North, welcome to you guys. Westerville, who I get the privilege of worshiping with every week. And man, Hilliard, you guys got it going on here, man. Good job. Love being here with you. And could every man and woman at Rock City Church welcome all the men and women at our correctional facilities, both in Franklin County and Athens County. We are so glad you're a part of what God is doing and transforming each of our lives every week. And thank you for being here as well. You know, we are in a series called Goliath Must Fall, and it's about some giants we need to put down in our lives in order to really walk in freedom and victory and the newness of life that God desires for all of us. We started this a couple of weeks ago. Pastor Kyle talked about the giant of addiction, and that was so powerful. And then last week, Pastor Kyle, did he not tear up this house last week? Can we just appreciate him? He talked about the giant of rejection. Both those, if you missed them, well worthy of your time to download those from our website. This week, man, I just need to thank Pastor Chad and Katie for the honor of being able to teach on the giant of this week. This giant, every one of us, man, struggles with, and it's the giant of anger. You know, some people were laughing when I got assigned this topic because I'm a real chill kind of dude, and I don't get explosively angry, at least a lot. It does happen. I'm just one of those people that bury it and stuff it down. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But man, anger has a way of just bubbling from what's below the surface and coming out. And it could go from 0 to 100 in about 40 seconds. Can it? Have you experienced that? You know, this anger, if it's left unchecked, this giant in our lives, it can destroy friendships and marriages and families, companies, teams, neighborhoods, even churches. And it always just lurks below the surface. Now, I said I'm pretty chill, but there are times I can get explosive anger. And one of my memories, that was at the beginning of the year, Rock City Church, every beginning of every year, does what we call a 21-day fast. And it's a really cool experience. It's basically we're giving up something we love for something we love even more. And many of us that do this at Rock City, we fast food for 21 days. But, you know, people don't have to do that. They can fast anything that just dominates their time and attention. It gives us a chance to focus in on taking next steps in our personal journey with God, to pray for the future of our own lives, for Rock City Church. It's such a cool time. I love the 21-day fast, but I also dread it because I love me some food, all right? Now, during this 21-day fast, we were about halfway through the 21-day fast, and that's the point of the fast where every day is a victory. It's touch and go, whether I even wake up in the morning, that's a victory. And how many of you know that being hangry is very real, right? So I was driving to the church offices, and the way I do that is going down 315, I take the Henderson exit, and I was making some pretty good time, and that was a good thing because I was pushing up against the start time of a meeting I needed to be at the offices. I got off on the Henderson exit, and if you've been on Henderson Road, you know it's a row of stoplights, and I had just gotten greeted by a whole line of traffic, more cars than I could even see the end of. And so, you know, I got there, and because I was just starting to be late, that upped the anger a little bit, my hangriness. And then I got through the first stoplight. The second stoplight, I was third in line. And, you know, when you're third in line at a stoplight, you're feeling pretty good that you're going to make it through the next stoplight, right? Well, until the stoplight turned green and the brake lights of the person in the front didn't go off. And somewhere, somehow, something exploded in me. I was looking through two windshields and I could tell this dude was working on his phone, and I erupted inside of my enclosed car. I started screaming at him, "Put away your phone." And then I used the God-given piece of equipment inside of every one of our vehicles to keep us from becoming homicidal maniacs. I used my horn, okay? Now, I wish I could tell you I did a little Christian honk, a little toot-toot. No, I did a going straight to hell, lay into it horn, okay? And it did feel so good, I gotta tell you. Several things happened almost instantaneously that I wasn't expecting. There was an elderly, nice-looking lady in the car right in front of me. She turned around and gave me a glare that started peeling my face. And she also flipped me off. Now, I'm a pastor. That just doesn't happen very often, all right? So you would think the shock of that would have calmed me down? No, I was already, how many people have been angry and something like that just takes you to a whole nother level of anger? And so I was now yelling at this lady inside of my enclosed car. Contextualize, woman. Look around you. That honk was not meant for you. That was clearly a hook honk, designed to hook around you and land on the car in front of you. Well, my hook honk did work. He finally looked up and guns it to get through the stoplight, and she makes it through. And I felt I'd already done my penance at that stoplight, so I make it through on a rather stalish type, yellow type thing. And I realized my mistake immediately because I realized all the rest of the way down Henderson, I had to stay behind her, because I had just recently commissioned my daughter to put a Rock City bumper sticker on the back of my car. And I didn't want to live with that guilt. If she found out I went to Rock City Church and that totally ruined her, ever meeting Christ, I would feel guilty. And so, man, this anger deal is real. It can elevate and compound so quickly within us. Every one of us has struggled with it. Either we have been exploding on someone or we've been the victims of somebody exploding on us. It's interesting to me because we're going to dive into just a few verses here at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. This was right at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. And at the very beginning, his popularity was skyrocketing. People were hearing about this guy who was speaking amazingly well, and he would be doing miracles. People would travel days just to see and hear him themselves. And so right at the very beginning of this amazing message called the Sermon on the Mount, one of his most famous messages, he talks about this giant of anger. In fact, he says, man, you got to go beneath the surface. I'm not talking about the surface stuff of anger. I'm talking what's going on in the heart below the surface. See, he was saying that the root of so many giants in our life is anger. Anger is the catalyst. Man, if you really think about it, anger can spin all these giants out of it. It just, shrapnel goes flying and we start doing things that we know we shouldn't do. Anger can be the catalyst of that. So right at the very beginning, he talks about the stages of anger. So stage one is anger, and look at this in verse 21. You have heard that it was said to people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. Basically, he's saying what they already know. Every one of his audience knew about the 10 Commandments, and that's one of the big 10. You shouldn't kill anyone. Don't kill nobody, all right? And there was people he was talking to that were going, man, I got this nailed. I'm so righteous, so religious. Man, you look at me and I'm the picture poster child of the heart of God because I have not killed a single soul in my whole life. So Jesus said, you know that, but let me go beneath the surface. Look at this. But I tell you that anyone who is angry, there it is, angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Man, he's saying you walk around and you are all proud of yourself for not killing anyone, but you are justifying the stoking of the fire, the anger fire inside of your heart toward your spouse, toward your family member, toward a friend, toward someone you work with, toward a neighbor you can't stand. Jesus says, what I'm seeing inside, underneath the surface, is this anger fire, and it's not reflecting the love of God in your heart. So he talks about this progression of anger. He starts with anger, okay, and that's kind of this slow burn type thing. You know, you're feeling it a little bit, you're just kind of burying it, you're not really dealing with it. But then it goes to stage 2, which is contempt. Look at what verse 22 says. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, "Raka," is answerable to the court. Now, we need some help here because we don't use the word "raka" very often, right? In fact, nobody probably does because it's Aramaic. It's not even English. And a lot of the translations of the Bible, they don't try to translate this word, so they just put it right in from the Aramaic, "raka." And basically, you can almost tell what this word means when you say it. Can you say it with me? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Raka. Okay? It has that connotation of, coughing up something to spit out on someone. That's what this word means. It's showing contempt. It means you idiot, you worthless piece of scum, you fool, you bonehead, you loser, you jerk. It's when I want to express contempt for someone, that's what raka means. I don't really care whether I hurt you or not because in my mind, you're not even worthy of consideration. You would never be in my circle. Can I just give you a clue as to why this is so damaging? Because God has put at the core of every one of our hearts this need to belong to something, somewhere, someone. And when I spit on that need, that does a whole lot of damage to people. It's saying, I don't really want you to belong to me. I don't want you to be associated with me. I hate you. So Jesus says there's this progressive nature. It starts out with anger, then goes to this contempt, this raka, and then it goes to stage 3, which is the nuclear thing, okay? It goes to cursing. And verse 22, it says, if you curse someone, you are in danger of the fires of hell. We don't have to, translate that. We understand what cursing is, right? All the words your mama told you never to say in public, that's what he's referring to. So this is the progression. It starts with this anger, the slow burn. It comes out now with contempt, and now it just goes nuclear. Shrapnel is flying. He says, man, when that stuff happens, it comes straight from the smoldering garbage heap of hell in your life. What lies beneath the surface? Why does Jesus make such a big deal about this? Well, if you read the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, he starts painting this incredible picture of how he wants his kingdom built. And if you're a Christ follower today, how he wants you to respond to people around you. He wants us to be known for our love, not our anger. A love, a kindness, an openness, a trust, a gentleness, a forgiveness, a grace-giving spirit toward people and his followers. Jesus says that love would be beyond anything else his followers could do to convince the world that Christianity is both true and real. The most compelling evidence to the truth of Christianity is our love for one another. In John 13, Jesus says this, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. This is not an overstatement on Jesus' part. He bets the kingdom farm on love. This is the kingdom trump card. This pure-hearted, life-giving, persistent, patient, gracious, forgiving love, it demands a divine explanation. It makes people look up and say, only God could make a heart that loving. Can I step aside for just a second? This is one of the reasons why I fell in love with Rock City Church, and I know many of you did as well, because the Rock City Church has such a beyond-the-walls focus, right? Where we continually try to show love to people around us. This coming weekend, July 13th, there is a huge opportunity, and let me just talk about this for a second, just to put it on your radar. We're calling it Serve Day, but this is exactly what Jesus is talking about here. To just clothe ourselves with this kind of love that just makes people's jaw drop and go, wow, what is this? What's compelling people to do that? We have serving projects all over the communities that we're associated with, all over the city. And you get to be a part of it this Saturday from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. A great opportunity. We only do like 4 or 5 of these all-church events during the year, so we don't try to inundate you. But this is a biggie, and I just want to make sure that you at least know about it. We're going to give you more information how you could be a part of it at the end of the service. But love like that breaks down barriers, does it not? It just points people to the source of love, God himself. And you can understand why Jesus starts his sermon talking about anger, because anger stands in direct opposition of what he wants flowing out of our hearts. See, love for God and people are clearly connected. Clearly connected. Scripture says, whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. Liar. Man, there's this curious linkage between our love for God and our love for people. This really got nailed home to me right after I graduated from seminary several years ago. I was hired as a pastor of a church in Texas, and that church went through what we call a church split. It was devastating to me personally, but devastating to the church. Basically, there was such a grievous argument that half the church ended up leaving, all right? So during this, before it actually took place, the split, there was a series of these meetings where you had people, and I was part of this, and this is what I'll never forget. We were part of this meeting, and I was this bright-eyed seminary student, just so grateful to be a part of a life-changing, eternity-impacting endeavor called the church. Had great dreams. And this meeting had just lowered itself to yelling, accusations flying, cussing at each other, this hatred, this malice toward one another. And I remember sitting against the wall, just shaking my head going, this is what Jesus was dreaming about? This? This is the part I'll never forget, because we had to cut that meeting short because there was a worship night that night. And so I remember filing out of this very heated room and going into the auditorium, and it was relatively full, and so the only really a lot of chairs that were empty was right in the very front. So we went down the aisle, filled in this row, people that couldn't stand each other. And that was the most awkward hour and a half of my life. You know, people raising their hands, worshiping Jesus. And it almost made me sick. You can understand why God reacts to this so strongly. God bet the kingdom farm on love. And that's why he says, even if there's a little breakdown of love, Jesus suggests to take drastic measures to restore that relationship. You know, we all know some of the rules of public gathering. And we know these rules. Some are written, some are unwritten. You know, when we're in a setting like this, and if somebody comes in and wants to sit in the middle of the row, you know, we want to, you know, maybe let them know that they're late, you know, just by a glance or a glare or something. But, you know, we're polite enough to at least move our you know, legs so they could crawl over, or we stand up and kind of lean back so they have as much space as possible. Just a couple of months ago, there was a movie that just had opened up, and a friend of mine were going to go see it, and he got there first and saved me a seat in the middle of a row. And the previews had just started. I found him in the theater, a crowded theater, and so I started making my way down that row. And as I was looking down the row, honestly, there was this guy that was like overly proud of his beer belly there. He saw me coming. And I think I picked up a little bit from his expression that he was a little disturbed that I was going to interrupt his, you know, previews. And so as I got closer, he got up, okay? But instead of leaning back so I could get through, he took a step forward. And so now that meant his belly was extending over the back of the seat in front of him. And so literally, I'm looking at him going, I have two choices. I can either go limbo and try to get underneath, or I could just kind of concave my body and squeeze around anyway. Well, I chose the latter, and that was the most awkward moment that I've had because our stomachs were scraping, and he never lost eye contact. It was like, whoa, okay, I get it. Under my breath, I was calling him Raka. But we know these rules, right? We know that, like when you're at a theater or at a concert, you shouldn't just carry on and talk to your neighbor. Or you really shouldn't take a cell phone call, right? Right? I mean, and we know how to make people, we know the glare, we know how to get people to understand they're violating one of these rules. You know, at the end of a movie, during a climatic ending, you never get up right then and climb over people and distracting it, right? You just don't do it. Well, you take all those rules that we know in our culture and you multiply them by about 100, and you get the culture that Jesus is talking to. This first century AD culture, it was stiff, it was formal, it was liturgical. When you went to a worship experience at the temple, you would not even think about being late. It would just never happen. You wouldn't think about carrying on a conversation with somebody next to you. You certainly would not get up and leave before the formal ending of that. So against the backdrop of all these unwritten standards of behavior, at this point in the greatest sermon of history, Jesus does something unthinkable. He gives a free pass to anybody in any worship experience, even those here at Rock City, to get up and be rude and pass over as many people and leave before the end of the service. He says, man, if there's a broken relationship, a strained relationship, or there's a place where love has been broken down, it's justifiable cause for rudely exiting the worship service. Look at what he says in the next verse in Matthew 5:23. So if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, you got a little strife going on, a little beef. Either you have something against them, they have something against you. Leave your sacrifice there at the altar. Go and be reconciled to that person, then come and offer your sacrifice to God. Friends, I can't tell you the effect that would have on his listeners. He would be looking at a whole bunch of open mouths at this point. This broke all of their worship service rules of etiquette. It shocked them so much because they never put together, they never really understood how important right relationships were in God's scheme of things. God puts right relationships in the same league as right worship. See, what they did was they put right worship way up here. And they thought, man, if they got to this temple on time for the worship experience and they obeyed all the rules of etiquette that they had to, they would walk away from that worship experience thinking, God and me are tight. Man, we're tight, all right? But they put relationships way down low in the priority list. Jesus says this in Mark 12, the most important commandment is this: you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. There's this bond between our relationship to others and our relationship to God. That's so powerful to get to know. And so Jesus said, man, you know, even in the quiet moments of the worship experience, if God is working on your heart, the Holy Spirit's working on your heart about a broken relationship where there's anger and bitterness harboring and not a love that's flowing out freely, you have every right to get up in the middle of any worship experience and be as rude as you want to be, going down the aisle, pardon me, excuse me, all the way and exit to make that relationship right. Forget protocol. And then he says timing is everything, right? He said don't wait till the end of the service. That could have just been 30 more minutes. Why not wait? You know, if some of you have had a medical emergency, let's say your appendix ruptured, you know that those toxins and poisons are going into your system, and 30 minutes could really make a big difference in your recovery. Jesus is saying, man, this evil, this anger that gets starting to poison and toxin your heart, don't wait 30 minutes. Don't allow it to take a bigger root into your life. He's saying, man, stop using large amounts of emotional resources to feed and nurture the very thing that's killing you and killing others. He said, get rid of it. Paul says in Ephesians 4, he agrees. He says, don't let the sun go down while you were still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. Man, when Satan gets in there, he could totally counteract the trump card of building God's kingdom. Because when he can get us all embroiled with anger, we are not going to reflect his love to the world. You got to realize that our witness to the world hangs in balance to how we tackle this giant of anger. Man, try to reconcile this. If God grants you the grace to reconcile the relationship that was temporarily lost, our kingdom trump card is restored, and love is right back out there in the forefront again. So how are we doing? How are you doing with anger? This is a universal giant. This is one that God, Jesus, is imploring us to look at in our own lives. But how do you manage it? I've already inferred or hinted a little bit how my management style of anger is. I just want to expose a few of them, just maybe if you can identify with one of these. And I want to expose the lie in them as well. The first one I said I am guilty of. I'm a trash compactor type of anger management style, okay? Anybody know what a trash compactor is? Beautiful concept. You see them outside of restaurants, outside of businesses, outside of, stores. But the idea of a trash compactor is that you could put garbage in, you could fill it up to the brim, right? Then you just push a button and it all smashes down to a lot smaller size so you can refill it again, okay? You don't have to empty the thing as many times. This is the deal about trash compactors. It always starts to stink. Man, it starts to stink. It always starts to leak. It just gets nasty. These are the people that are trash compactors and just keep pushing it down. These are the people that know them well, can understand they're upset about something, and they'll ask, what's wrong? Nothing. And they just manipulate and isolate themselves, but they're really angry. There's a proverb that goes along with all these different types. I love this one in Proverbs 14. Let each heart knows its own bitterness, and no one else can share its joy. Listen to me, friends. When you bury anger, when you just compact it, it always leaks. It will poison people around you. It will poison your heart. It will poison your attitude. It will poison your very body. So that's one style of management. Maybe that's what you do, like I do. Another style of anger management is the self-bomber. The self-bomber is the people that use their anger, but they're very targeted, okay? They will, as they're leaving a room, they will fire something very sarcastic or biting to somebody they're angry with. And sometimes they will use sarcasm in a group, okay? And so they will have other people in that group laugh at their sarcasm at the expense of one person. This also has a great proverb in Proverbs 14. It says, Proverbs 17, starting a quarrel is like punching a hole in the dam. That's what a self-bomber does. So I never intended to bust down the dam. All I wanted to do was ding the dam, okay? But if you ding the dam enough, catastrophic damage will occur. Maybe you're the intimidator type. This is probably more traditionally what we think about when somebody is explosive with anger. They don't stuff down anything. They're not trash compactors. Man, if they feel it, it's coming out, okay? It's flying, they're spewing it. Shrapnel is flying around them. These are the people that will yell, scream, curse. They will punch the wall. They will kick the cat. They will slam doors. They will squeal tires. They will power up on you when they're really mad. And their tone and their body language makes you just cower, makes you afraid. You're going to try to stay away from this person, especially when they're angry. There was a group of guys that were hanging out one day, and you know how guys sometimes do. They try to be macho or whatever, studly, and they want to one-up each other, where they were talking about different conflicts. And one of the guys said, well, man, last night, my wife and I, we got down and dirty in a fight. But I just want to let all you guys know that by the end of the fight, she came crawling up to me on her hands and knees. And the other guys are going, dude, man, what did she say? And he said, well, she said, you get on out of that bed, from under that bed, and you fight like a man. I love that one. You know, people are like that, just intimidating types of people. Last one, prosecuting attorney. Maybe this is you. You know, prosecuting attorney types have justice at their core. And a lot of times when we get angry, it's because we feel like we've been treated with injustice. And we need to set the record straight. We need to make sure justice rules again. So when there's injustice, he or she can't let that violation rest. So they start planning the attack. They start digging up dirt. They keep excellent records. They mark evidence, Exhibit A, Exhibit B. They bring up old cases from days gone by. They're asking leading questions. They're cranking up the interrogation light. They're badgering the witness. This is the thing about having somebody that's a prosecuting attorney type angry with you. They will come with so much force of knowledge and evidence that if you are at the brunt of that anger, you will eventually probably just cave. Okay, I'm guilty, even if you're not. Look at what Proverbs says in Proverbs 20. Avoiding a fight is a mark of honor. Only fools insist on quarreling. And one more proverb I'll throw in for free. Proverbs 10, don't talk so much. That's beautiful. And don't keep putting your foot in your mouth. Be sensible and turn off the flow. Man, words to live by. Do you see why Jesus wanted to take us to a place beneath the surface? It's not enough for any of us to say, man, I've never killed anyone. When we're stoking, when we're keeping those fires burning inside of our heart, that's totally disrupting his kingdom trump card of love. It's neutralizing it. Satan is winning in our hearts. So how do we slay this giant of anger? You know, I know more than likely even today, you're going to have some raka moments. You're going to have some moments where anger is going to want to well up in you. Most certainly several times this week. And when those anger moments come, they're very real. And we have choices to make, okay? And so what I would want to do is just give you a few points of how God tells us to slay this giant. And it needs to be slayed in every one of our hearts, every one of our lives. So I want to make this easy to remember, so in the middle of a raka moment, you can remember it. And so I'm going to do an alliteration, if you flip your notes, of the word raka, R-A-C-A. Okay, the word, or the first letter is R, and that point is just remember God's heart. Just take a moment and remember God's heart. God's heart is that he loves you, only wants the best for you. And when your heart is embroiled with anger, those toxins become poisonous and creates this huge barrier to reflecting God's love to the people around you. There are times in my life where I will start getting angry because I'm a trash compactor, and I'll start blowing off the anger. I'll say, man, man up, Reg. Get over it. You ever tried just to get over anger? Convince yourself it's no big deal. I'll be fine. The problem with that is this: it doesn't work. You're not fine. You don't get over it. And the longer we harbor this in our hearts, the more cold and more calloused our hearts become. Jesus even uses this illustration that people would go to church. They would go to a worship experience, and they think they were doing the most important thing, when in reality, the most important thing is that they leave church to make some things right with people. He says, dealing with your anger is more important than what you thought was the most important thing. Let me repeat that. Dealing with your anger is more important than what you thought was the most important thing. So let me ask, what's the most important thing on your agenda this week? Could perhaps that agenda item becoming the second most important agenda item this week? Is there something bigger to reflect God's heart for you? He wants us to live in freedom. He wants us to live in victory, in newness of life. And this anger can take all those things out of our lives. Dealing with your anger is more important than the most important thing. So that's R, remembering God's heart. A, act now, don't delay. Let me just state this. I probably should have stated this earlier. But what Jesus is talking about here is not forcing reconciliation. Okay, even though you might leave early just to take care of something, a bad relationship, you can't force reconciliation. There's always two parties, okay? You can open yourself up to reconciliation, but you can't force the other person. And he's not talking about just taking the guilt of whatever that person is angry about you, just taking that and saying, okay, I was wrong, because that might not be right. You might not be wrong, all right? So he's not just telling you to take a dive. And you got to listen to me here. He's not saying we need to put ourselves in harm's way, okay? If you are in a dangerous situation, you need to find help now, okay? Now. But Jesus, all he's saying is to open yourself up to quickening the pace of reconciling with another person. Act now, don't delay. Don't wait weeks, months, years before having that conversation. Sometimes I know myself, in the middle of a heated argument or after a heated argument, I need to get by myself, maybe go for a walk, just to kind of cool off, get a handle on what I'm truly experiencing on the inside. That's healthy. That's healthy, but always go back and take care of what is brewing on the inside. Jesus says, do your best to settle things quickly. Don't delay confrontation. Don't let the sun go down in your anger. So R, remember God's heart. A, act now, don't delay. C, choose forgiveness. Choose forgiveness. I was just having a conversation with a staff member a few weeks ago about the wrath of God. That sound ominous? The wrath of God, the anger of God. And nobody wants to get the brunt of the wrath of God, right? But you don't have to read long in the Bible before you realize that his wrath is not toward people. He loves you. He loves me. He went through great lengths to show that love for us. What he is talking about is sin. He hates the sin in our lives because he knows what it's doing to us. So his wrath is going against our sin. His wrath is great, but his forgiveness is always greater. Amen? His wrath is great, but his forgiveness is always greater. I love how far God separates us from our sin when he forgives us. It says in Psalm 103 that he separates our sin as far as the east is from the west. Now, I know my mind might not be typical and it's kind of weird at times, but let me just take you in on one of those weird journeys. I always was not always, but was wondering a few years back why it said east from the west, not north from the south. And I think I stumbled across the answer. Okay, you ready to take this journey with me? You got to play along. If you're in the North Pole and you go to Columbus, Ohio, which way would you be traveling? South, good. You guys are good. You go from Columbus and you go to South America, which way would you be traveling? South. You go from South America to the South Pole, which way would you be traveling? South, okay? Going in the same direction, you would leave the South Pole, you'd go up to Africa. Now which way would you be traveling? North. Ooh, Okay? Let's take east from the west. Let's start in Columbus. Let's go to New York. Which way are you going? East. You're going to Europe. Which way would you be going? Russia. Which way would you be going? Back to California. Which way would you still be going? Going to Columbus, Ohio. Which way would you still be going? Ain't that cool? God didn't say as far as the north is from the south, because eventually those two find each other. He says as far as the east is from the west, because they never will meet. Wow, that's powerful. Pastor Chaim last week said a line that I love. He said, rejected people reject people. I have thought about that a lot this week. I just want to tweak it a little bit for this giant. I want to say forgiven people forgive people. Forgiven people forgive people. And freedom and slaying this giant starts with our forgiving other people. It says in Colossians 3, make allowances for each other's faults. I mean, we're going to hurt each other. We're human, okay? Make allowances for that and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive them. You know, it means you may recall the hurt, but don't relive it over and over again. Forgiveness means I don't keep a record of wrongs anymore. I've given up my right to get even. You let go. So Raka, R, remember God's heart. A, act now, don't delay. C, choose forgiveness, the last A. Allow your attitude, your anger to be changed to love. You know what I love about this one? It's very biblical. I love that usually when we are the brunt of somebody's anger, it puts us in a defensive posture. And our anger wells up in that defensive posture. This turns it around and puts us clearly on the offense. You know, Jesus says this, Paul says this in Romans, if your enemies are hungry, do what? Feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. Kill them with kindness. Allow that anger to be transformed to love. They won't know what to think, and it helps your heart heal when you respond to them in kindness. Jesus says in Luke chapter 6, but if you are willing to listen, I say love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hurt you. Man, you want to have the quickest pathway to slaying this giant of anger? This is what we need to do. Go on the offensive. Allow God to transform that anger into love. Man, you know, how often do we get angry and we think our anger towards someone will punish them? It will lock them up in a prison of our anger. But I think every one of us knows that when we get angry, all we're doing is embroiling ourselves. We're locking ourselves up in a prison of anger and bitterness that God wants to set us free from. One of my TV shows when I was a little kid growing up, back when there was only like 2 TV shows. Let me just whistle the beginning. Maybe you can recognize it. You know what that was? The Andy Griffith Show, exactly. I loved Andy Griffith Show. I loved Andy. He was the town sheriff, right? Barney was the deputy. You know, I love Floyd, Goober. I love Opie, Aunt Bee. Thelma Lou, she made some great pies. They kept on getting stolen from her windowsill, but I'm sure they were good. Ernest T. Bass, remember him? One of my favorite characters, Otis. Otis was a lovable guy, but he was known as the town drunk. And he would feel so bad after a binge on alcohol that he would just walk into the jail, right? He would go into a jail cell, he'll shut the door behind him. And, you know, Barney would always, before he left for the evening, tell Otis, okay, Otis, you can stay here, but I'm going to hang the key to this jail cell right outside your door. So anytime you want to leave, just take that key and let yourself out. That's what Jesus does for us. So this is a big giant that we need to take care of in order for the world around us to know there is one God, and that God is love. The simplest definition of God is love. And we need to represent that. Some of us are locked into a prison of anger and bitterness. And God says, I'm putting the key right there. If you're ready, if you're willing, just take that key and let yourself out of the jail cell. Remember my heart. Remember my heart. Act now. Don't delay. Choose forgiveness and allow that anger to be transformed to love. Will you pray with me? Father, man, this is a big Goliath. I think there were people all over Rock City this morning that were hearing stuff that they need to think through and maybe even apply. Maybe some conversations they need to have right after we dismiss here. But Father, it's for such a big cause, a big endeavor called the church. Your dream for the church is that we would win seekers and cynics alike because of our love that has no human explanation, just a divine one. It points people squarely to you, God. And Lord, I know there's some people here as well that need to take that key that you offer to unlock themselves from the jail of what they've been harboring in their hearts for a long time. Lord, when we got to that choose forgiveness point, I also know there are people that's almost a foreign concept to them. They can kind of get it. But it's really hard to offer forgiveness when we ourselves have not experienced your forgiveness. And so, Lord, those people, could you open up their hearts right now just for them to say to you, God, I need to be forgiven. I don't want to face the wrath of God, especially when you sent your son Jesus to die in my place on the cross, to take the hit I deserve. And so, Lord, I ask for that forgiveness. I need that forgiveness. I know you will give it to me. And Lord, I want you to be the leader of my life for the rest of my life. Lord, so I can have a relationship with you that spans beyond my life here on earth, but throughout eternity. Lord, help us to be a church that reflects your love well. And Lord, it starts individually in each of our hearts. But Lord, even this coming weekend where we get to explode this kind of love in our communities, in our city, Lord, help us to represent you incredibly well. And may your kingdom grow as a result. Lord, we love you. We love meeting together, learning from you. We love worshiping you. So Lord, take this final song of worship and be glorified. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.